A rich man named Edward hired a poor black woman, Maya, to pretend to be his fiancée for a business deal, convinced that money could buy him everything he needed. But as their worlds collided, what Maya did next left everyone speechless. Can a heart set on business turn a transaction into a transformation? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Edward Price stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, his steely gaze fixed on the city skyline. The view had always filled him with a sense of pride and accomplishment, but today it left him feeling strangely empty. "Mr. Price," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 2 o'clock is here." Edward sighed, straightening his designer tie. "Send them in." The glass door swung open and 2 men in crisp suits entered. Edward recognized them as representatives from the government contract he'd been eyeing for months. "Gentlemen," Edward said, his voice cool and controlled, "what can I do for you?" The older of the 2 men cleared his throat. "Mr. Price, we've reviewed your proposal and we're impressed with your company's capabilities." Edward allowed himself a small smile. "But?" he prompted, sensing there was more. The younger man stepped forward. "But we have concerns about your public image, Mr. Price. The government is looking for partners who are not just financially successful, but also relatable." Edward's brow furrowed. "Relatable?" The word felt foreign on his tongue. "Yes," the older man nodded. "Family-oriented, community-minded, someone the public can trust and connect with." Edward's mind raced. He'd always seen his personal life as irrelevant to his business success. Now, it seemed, it was becoming a liability. "I see," Edward said, his voice tight. "And how do you suggest I address this concern?" The men exchanged glances. Perhaps some public appearances with family, charity work, anything to show you're more than just a businessman. As the meeting concluded and the men left, Edward sank into his leather chair. He stared at the framed magazine covers on his wall, each declaring him a titan of industry. For the first time, he wondered if they told the whole story. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his sister asking if he'd be attending their niece's dance recital. He'd always declined such invitations before, deeming them a waste of time. Now, Edward hesitated. Maybe it was time for a change. Not just for the contract, but for himself. The thought both terrified and intrigued him. Edward sat in his plush office chair, surrounded by his team of advisors. The tension in the room was thick as they discussed the government contract and his image problem. "Sir," his PR manager Sarah began hesitantly, "we've been brainstorming ideas to soften your public persona." Edward raised an eyebrow. "Go on," he said, his voice cool and detached. Sarah took a deep breath. "We think you need a fiancé." The room fell silent. Edward's face remained impassive, but his mind was racing. A fiancé. The idea seemed preposterous. "Explain?" he demanded. His tone clipped. "Well," Sarah continued, gaining confidence, "a loving relationship would show the public a softer side of you. It could make you appear more relatable, more human." Edward leaned back in his chair, considering the proposal. He'd always viewed relationships as unnecessary distractions, but this could be different. "You're suggesting I find someone to play a role," he stated flatly. His team exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Not exactly, sir," his CFO, Tom, chimed in. "We were hoping you might—" "No," Edward cut him off. "I see the merit in your suggestion, but I have no interest in a real relationship." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to the team. "This is simply another business transaction," he mused, almost to himself. "We'll hire someone, an actress perhaps, someone who can convincingly play the part of a loving fiancé." His team looked shocked, but Edward's mind was already whirring with possibilities. He turned back to face them, his expression determined. "Set it up," he ordered. "Find me a suitable candidate, someone intelligent, poised, and able to keep up with our world. And make sure they understand this is strictly business." As his team scrambled to take notes and make plans, Edward felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. This was just another move in the game of business, he told himself. Nothing more. Yet as he dismissed his team and sat alone in his office, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into uncharted territory. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. Edward's sleek black car pulled up to the curb outside his towering office building. As he stepped out, his eyes swept the familiar street. That's when he saw her again. Maya Brooks, a black woman, stood behind a small table, her dark hands carefully arranging colorful handmade crafts. Edward had noticed her many times before, but he'd never given her more than a passing glance. Today was different. As he watched her smile warmly at a customer, an idea began to form in his mind. "Good morning, Mr. Price," his assistant greeted him at the building's entrance. Edward nodded absently, his gaze still fixed on Maya. "That woman," he said, gesturing towards her. "What do you know about her?" His assistant looked surprised. "Not much, sir. Her name is Maya Brooks. She sells handmade crafts here most days." Edward's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Find out everything you can about her," he instructed. Throughout the day, Edward found himself distracted. He kept thinking about Maya, wondering if she could be the solution to his problem. As the sun began to set, Edward left his office and walked towards Maya's table. She was packing up for the day, carefully placing her unsold items into a worn cardboard box. "Miss Brooks," Edward said, his voice softer than usual. Maya looked up, surprise evident in her warm brown eyes. "Yes?" "I'm Edward Price," he introduced himself, extending his hand. Maya's eyebrows rose as she shook his hand. "I know who you are, Mr. Price. Your building casts quite a shadow over my little table," she said with a small smile. Edward felt an unfamiliar twinge in his chest at her words. He pushed it aside, focusing on his purpose. "I have a business proposition for you," he said carefully. Maya tilted her head, curiosity replacing surprise. "A business proposition? For me?" Edward nodded, his mind racing. Here was someone who could play the role of his fiancée without complications, someone who wouldn't expect more than what he was offering, someone who, he realized, could benefit greatly from such an arrangement. "Yes," he said, his voice gaining confidence. "I believe we could help each other." Edward cleared his throat, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. "Ms. Brooks, I'd like to offer you a job. It's unconventional, but it could be very beneficial for both of us." Maya's eyes widened. "A job? What kind of job?" Edward glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "I need someone to pretend to be my fiancé for the next 10 months. It's for business reasons," he added quickly, seeing the shock on Maya's face. Maya took a step back, her brow furrowed. "Pretend to be your fiancé? I don't understand." Edward sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I need to improve my public image for an important contract. Having a fiancé would help. I'm willing to pay you a substantial sum for your time and discretion." Maya's hand trembled slightly as she closed the box of crafts. How much are we talking about?" Edward named a figure that made Maya's eyes widen even further. It was more money than she'd ever seen in her life. That's a lot of money," Maya whispered, her mind racing. Edward nodded. "It is, and it could be yours. All you have to do is attend some events with me, smile for some photos. Nothing inappropriate, I assure you." Maya bit her lip, her thoughts in turmoil. The money could solve so many of her problems. She could pay off her debts, maybe even save the community art center that was on the verge of closing. But pretending to be engaged to a man she barely knew? I don't know, Mr. Price," Maya said hesitantly. "This is a lot to take in." Edward's face remained impassive, but inside, he felt a flicker of desperation. He needed this to work. "I understand it's a big decision. Why don't you take some time to think about it? I can give you my card and you can let me know your decision in a day or two." Maya nodded slowly, accepting the sleek business card Edward handed her. "Okay," she said softly. I'll think about it." As Edward walked away, Maya stared at the card in her hand, her mind swirling with possibilities and doubts. The offer was tempting, but was it worth it? Could she really pretend to be in love with a man like Edward Price? Maya walked home that evening, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The weight of Edward's business card felt heavy in her pocket, a constant reminder of the life-changing decision before her. As she entered her tiny apartment, her eyes fell on the dusty easel tucked away in the corner. It had been months since she'd touched it. With a sigh, she ran her fingers along the worn wood, memories flooding back. She remembered the joy of her first art show, the pride in her parents' eyes as they admired her paintings. But then came the mounting bills, the struggle to make rent, and the heart-wrenching choice to set aside her brushes for more practical pursuits. Maya sank onto her worn couch, pulling out Edward's card. The offer was tempting, more money than she'd ever dreamed of. It could change everything. "I could pay off my debts," she murmured to herself, "maybe even save the community art center." But the thought of pretending to be engaged to a man like Edward Price made her stomach churn. He was so cold, so different from the warm, creative people she usually surrounded herself with. Maya closed her eyes, picturing the struggling families in her neighborhood, the children whose eyes lit up when they held a paintbrush. With Edward's money, she could help them all. "It's just for a few months," she reasoned. "I can do this. For them. For my future." With trembling hands, Maya reached for her phone. She dialed the number on the card, her heart pounding as it rang. "Mr. Price, it's Maya Brooks. I've made my decision. I'll do it. I'll be your fiancé." The next morning, Maya found herself in Edward's sleek office, perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than her entire apartment. Edward sat across from her, his piercing gaze fixed on a contract between them. "Let's go over the terms one more time," Edward said, his voice crisp and businesslike. "You'll pose as my fiancé for 10 months. During this time, you'll attend social events with me, be seen in public together, and generally support my image as a family-oriented man." Maya nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "And in return?" Edward's eyes flicked up to meet hers. "You'll receive a generous monthly stipend, plus a bonus at the end of our arrangement. All expenses related to our public appearances will be covered, of course." Maya took a deep breath. "I have some conditions of my own," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I won't lie about my background or who I am, and I need time off for my community work at the art center." For a moment, Edward looked like he might argue, but then he gave a curt nod. "Acceptable. We'll work around your schedule." As they went through the contract, Maya felt a mix of hope and unease. This could be her chance to finally get ahead, to help her community in ways she'd only dreamed of. But the coldness in Edward's eyes reminded her that this was just business to him. "One last thing," Maya said as they reached the final page. "When this is over, we go our separate ways, no strings attached." Edward's lip curled in what might have been amusement. "Believe me, Ms. Brooks, that won't be a problem." As they both signed the contract, Maya couldn't help but wonder what she was getting herself into. But the thought of finally being able to pursue her art again, to help the kids at the community center, steeled her resolve. Edward stood, extending his hand. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Brooks. Or should I say, my dear fiancé?" Maya shook his hand, forcing a smile. "I guess you should, Mr. Price." The next evening, Maya found herself standing beside Edward in a grand ballroom, surrounded by the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the gentle clinking of champagne glasses filled the air. Maya smoothed down her borrowed designer gown, feeling like a fish out of water. Edward leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "Remember, smile and nod. Let me do the talking." Maya nodded, her heart racing as they approached a group of well-dressed businessmen. "Ah, Edward," one of the men called out. "So this is the lucky lady we've been hearing about?" Edward's arm snaked around Maya's waist, pulling her close. "Indeed. Gentlemen, meet my fiancée, Maya Brooks." Maya smiled, trying to channel the confidence she didn't feel. "It's a pleasure to meet you all," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As Edward engaged in conversation about market trends and investment opportunities, Maya noticed the curious glances thrown her way. Some were friendly, others skeptical. She caught snippets of whispered conversations. Where did he find her? She's certainly different from his usual type. I wonder what she sees in him besides the obvious, of course. Maya's cheeks burned, but she held her head high. She might not belong in this world, but she wasn't about to let anyone make her feel small. Later that week, Edward brought Maya to a business meeting. She sat quietly beside him, feeling the weight of scrutiny from the other executives around the table. "So, Maya," one of the women said during a break, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "Edward tells us you're an artist. How quaint, and how did you two meet?" Maya opened her mouth to respond, but Edward cut in smoothly. "Maya's talent caught my eye. Her creativity brings a fresh perspective to my life." The woman raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure it does." As they left the meeting, Maya overheard two men talking in hushed tones. "It won't last," one said. "Edward Price settling down, please. This is clearly for show." "I give it 6 months tops," the other replied with a chuckle. Maya's stomach twisted. She knew this was all an act, but hearing others dismiss their relationship so easily stung more than she expected. She glanced at Edward, his face impassive as always, and wondered if he heard the comments too. If he did, he gave no sign that they bothered him. In the quiet moments between social events and business meetings, Maya found solace in her art. Her fingers, once calloused from long hours of crafting, were now softened by expensive lotions. But the passion in her heart remained unchanged. One afternoon, while Edward was locked away in his home office, Maya set up her supplies on the balcony of his luxurious penthouse. The city sprawled out before her, a canvas of concrete and steel. She pulled out her sketchbook and began to draw, losing herself in the familiar scratch of pencil on paper. As she worked, Maya's mind wandered to the community art center she used to volunteer at. She missed the laughter of children discovering their creativity, the pride in their eyes as they held up their finished projects. A pang of guilt tugged at her heart. She hadn't been there in weeks, too caught up in her new role as Edward's fiancée. Determined to keep her skills sharp, Maya started experimenting with new techniques. She watched online tutorials on her tablet, learning about resin art and alcohol ink painting. In the evenings, when Edward was busy with work calls, she'd practice these new methods, creating vibrant, abstract pieces that spoke of her inner turmoil and hope. One day, as Maya was putting the finishing touches on a delicate paper quilling project, Edward walked in unexpectedly. He paused, his eyes widening slightly at the intricate design before him. "I didn't know you could do that," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. Maya looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Edward." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, curiosity perhaps, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He nodded curtly and left the room, leaving Maya to wonder if she'd imagined the brief connection. As the weeks passed, Maya found herself torn between two worlds. In one, she was Edward's perfect fiancée, smiling and gracious at every turn. In the other, she was still the passionate artist, creating beauty with her hands and heart. She clung to her art like a lifeline, a reminder of who she truly was beneath the designer clothes and fake smiles. Edward's family gathered at his sprawling estate for a lavish dinner party. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and the clinking of crystal glasses. Maya stood by Edward's side, her heart racing beneath her elegant dress. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she belonged here, even if it was all pretend. As they entered the grand dining room, Edward's mother, a regal woman with silver hair, approached them. Her piercing gaze swept over Maya, assessing her from head to toe. "So this is the woman who's captured my son's heart," she said, her voice cool and measured. Maya smiled warmly, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Price. Edward has told me so much about you." To everyone's surprise, Maya's genuine warmth seemed to soften the older woman's demeanor. Mrs. Price's lips curved into a small smile as she took Maya's hand. Throughout the evening, Maya charmed Edward's family and friends with her authenticity. She shared stories of her community work and her passion for art, her eyes lighting up as she spoke. Edward watched from across the room, nodding approvingly at her performance. His cousin James sidled up to him, a glass of whiskey in hand. "She's quite something, isn't she?" he said, eyeing Maya suspiciously. "Where did you say you met her again?" Edward's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "At a charity event," he lied smoothly. "Maya's work in the community caught my attention." James raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. As the night wore on, Maya found herself in deep conversation with Edward's sister, Emily. The two women bonded over their shared love of art, with Maya explaining her latest projects. "You must show me your work sometime," Emily said enthusiastically. "Perhaps you could teach me a thing or two." Maya beamed, feeling a genuine connection forming. "I'd love that," she replied, her heart warming at the thought. Across the room, Edward observed the scene with satisfaction. Maya was playing her part perfectly, winning over his family and friends with her charm and sincerity. He allowed himself a small smile, pleased that his business decision was proving successful. As the dinner party wound down, a distinguished gentleman approached Edward and Maya. His salt and pepper hair and sharp suit exuded authority. "Mr. Price, Ms. Brooks," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Senator Johnson. I've been hearing wonderful things about you two this evening." Edward's eyes widened slightly. He recognized the senator as a key player in the government contract he was pursuing. Maintaining his composure, he shook the man's hand firmly. "It's an honor, Senator," Edward replied smoothly. "I hope you're enjoying the evening." Maya smiled warmly, her hand resting gently on Edward's arm. The senator's gaze lingered on their subtle display of affection. "I must say, you make quite the couple," Senator Johnson remarked, his eyes twinkling. "How long have you two been together?" Edward felt a bead of sweat form on his brow. He hadn't anticipated such direct questioning about their relationship. Maya, sensing his hesitation, jumped in. "It feels like we've known each other forever," she said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "But we've been officially together for about 6 months now." The senator nodded approvingly. "Young love," he chuckled. "It's refreshing to see. You know, my wife and I have been married for 40 years. We should all get together for dinner sometime. I'd love to hear more about your story." Edward's heart raced. A dinner with the senator could be the perfect opportunity to secure the contract, but it also meant prolonging their charade. He forced a smile. "We'd be delighted, Senator," he said, his arm instinctively wrapping around Maya's waist. As the senator walked away, Edward felt the weight of their deception pressing down on him. He led Maya to a quiet corner of the room, his face itched with concern. "This is getting complicated," he whispered, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "We need to be even more convincing now. The senator could make or break this deal." Maya nodded, her own anxiety rising. "I understand," she said softly. "We'll make it work, Edward. Just, maybe we should spend more time together, get to know each other better. It might help us seem more natural." Edward hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. The idea of spending more time with Maya outside of public events made him uncomfortable, but he knew she was right. They needed to be flawless in their performance. As they rejoined the party, Edward felt the pressure mounting. The stakes were higher now, and he couldn't afford any slip-ups. He looked at Maya, realizing that their fake relationship had just become far more crucial to his plans than he had ever anticipated. As the weeks passed, Maya found herself immersed deeper in Edward's world. Charity galas, business dinners, and high society events became a regular part of her life. She grew more comfortable in her role, learning to navigate the complex social dynamics of the elite. One sunny afternoon, Maya accompanied Edward to a community event. As they strolled through the local park, she noticed a small group of children huddled around an easel. Curiosity piqued, she approached them. "What's going on here?" Maya asked, her eyes lighting up at the sight of paintbrushes and vibrant colors. A woman with kind eyes smiled at her. "We're from the Community Art Center. We're giving these kids a chance to express themselves through painting." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She knelt down beside a little girl struggling with her brush. "May I?" she asked gently. The girl nodded, handing over the brush. With a few deft strokes, Maya helped bring the child's vision to life. The girl's eyes widened with wonder. "Wow, you're really good at this." Edward watched from a distance, surprised by the change in Maya's demeanor. He'd never seen her so animated, so alive. As they left the park, Maya couldn't stop talking about the art center. "They're doing such wonderful work, Edward, giving these kids a chance to explore their creativity. It's amazing." Edward nodded, only half listening as he checked his phone for important emails. But Maya's mind was racing with possibilities. Over the next few days, Maya found herself drawn back to the art center. She volunteered her time, teaching basic techniques to eager students. The familiar smell of paint and the texture of canvas under her fingers awakened something she thought she'd lost long ago. One evening, as she prepared for another event with Edward, Maya caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was dressed in an elegant gown, her hair perfectly styled, but her fingers itched to hold a paintbrush, her mind filled with images she longed to create. A deep sense of conflict washed over her. She loved the work she was doing at the art center, the joy of creating and inspiring others. But she also knew the importance of her role in Edward's life, the financial security it provided. Maya took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress. She had made a commitment to Edward, and she would see it through. But as she left for the event, her heart felt heavy with the weight of her rekindled passion and the uncertainty of her future. Edward couldn't help but notice Maya's growing enthusiasm for the community art center. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about the children's progress, and she often rushed off after their public appearances to volunteer there. At first, he dismissed it as part of her act, but as the days went by, he began to question her motives. One evening, as they sat in his luxurious penthouse after a charity gala, Edward decided to confront her. "Maya," he said, his voice cool and businesslike, "I've noticed you're spending a lot of time at that art center. Is there something I should know?" Maya's face lit up at the mention of the center. "Oh, Edward, it's wonderful. The kids are so talented, and they're learning so much. I feel like I'm making a real difference." Edward frowned, not understanding her enthusiasm. "But what's the point? It doesn't bring in any money. Shouldn't you be focusing on our arrangement?" Maya's smile faltered. She took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to explain. "It's not about money, Edward. Art is about expression, creativity, and joy. It feeds the soul in a way that money can't." Edward scoffed, shaking his head. "Feeds the soul? Maya, that's impractical. In this world, you need financial stability to succeed. These kids would be better off learning business skills." "But art can lead to success too," Maya argued, her voice soft but passionate. "It teaches problem solving, boosts confidence, and opens up new ways of thinking. It's not just about making pretty pictures." Edward waved his hand dismissively. "That's all well and good, but it doesn't pay the bills. I thought you understood the importance of financial security. Isn't that why you agreed to this arrangement in the first place?" Maya fell silent, hurt by Edward's cold logic. She realized that despite their time together, he still didn't understand her or her values. The gap between them suddenly felt wider than ever. Maya's heart sank as she looked at Edward. His cold, calculating eyes showed no understanding of her passion for art. She felt a wave of frustration wash over her, and for the first time since their arrangement began, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "Edward," she said softly, "there's more to life than just making money. The art center brings joy to those kids. It gives them hope and a chance to express themselves." Edward rolled his eyes. "Hope doesn't pay rent, Maya. I thought you of all people would understand that." His words stung, reminding Maya of her own financial struggles. She turned away, blinking back tears. "I do understand," she whispered, "but I also know that money isn't everything." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then, unexpectedly, Edward's expression softened. He reached out and gently touched Maya's arm. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice losing its usual sharp edge. I didn't mean to upset you, it's just, I've always believed that success is measured by financial gain. It's hard for me to see it any other way. Maya looked up, surprised by this glimpse of vulnerability. For a brief moment, she saw past Edward's tough exterior to the man beneath, a man who perhaps had never known the joy of creating something beautiful just for the sake of it. Maybe, she hesitated, then continued, maybe you could come to the art center sometime, see for yourself what it means to those kids. Edward's brow furrowed, but he didn't immediately dismiss the idea. I'll think about it, he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. As Maya watched him, she realized that there might be more to Edward than she had initially thought. Behind his businessman facade, there was a person capable of change, of growth. It didn't erase her frustration or doubts about their arrangement, but it did give her a glimmer of hope. As the days passed, the tension between Edward and Maya grew. Edward's skepticism about Maya's dedication to the art center became increasingly apparent, and Maya found herself defending her passion more often. One evening, as they prepared for another high society event, Edward couldn't help but comment, "You know, Maya, you could be using this time to network with potential buyers for your crafts. Instead, you're spending it on those kids who can't pay you." Maya took a deep breath, trying to calm her rising frustration. "Edward, not everything is about money. Those kids need a safe space to express themselves, to dream." Edward scoffed, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Dreams don't pay bills, Maya. I thought we established that." "No," Maya said firmly, turning to face him. "But they give life meaning, something I think you've forgotten." Edward's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Maya continued, her voice growing passionate. "Those kids at the art center? They're learning to believe in themselves. They're discovering talents they never knew they had. That's priceless, Edward." For a moment, Edward was silent, taken aback by Maya's fervor. He had never seen her speak so boldly before. I just don't understand," he admitted, his voice softer than usual. "How can you invest so much in something that doesn't give you a return?" Maya's expression softened. "The return isn't always financial, Edward. Sometimes it's in the smiles of those kids and the pride they feel when they create something beautiful. That's worth more than any paycheck to me." Edward shook his head, still not fully comprehending, but something in Maya's words seemed to touch him. "I suppose we see the world very differently," he said quietly. "We do," Maya agreed. "But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we could learn from each other." As they left for the event, Maya continued to fulfill her role as Edward's fiancée, smiling for the cameras and charming his associates. But now, there was a new spark in her eyes. She spoke more openly about her involvement with the community art center, surprising some of Edward's colleagues with her passion and dedication. The community art center buzzed with excitement as people from all walks of life gathered for the fundraising event. Maya stood near the makeshift stage, her heart pounding with nervous energy. She smoothed down her simple but elegant dress, a stark contrast to the designer outfits worn by many of the attendees. Edward lingered at the back of the room, checking his watch every few minutes. He had only come because Maya insisted it was important for their public image. As the crowd settled, Maya took center stage, her eyes scanning the room until they locked with Edward's. Taking a deep breath, Maya began her speech. "Art isn't just about pretty pictures on a wall," she said, her voice trembling slightly at first but growing stronger with each word. "It's about healing broken hearts and mending torn communities." As Maya spoke, her passion shone through. She told stories of children finding hope through creativity, of elderly folks rediscovering joy in painting classes. Her words painted vivid pictures of lives transformed by the power of art. "When a child picks up a paintbrush for the first time," Maya continued, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, "they're not just making art. They're building confidence, discovering their voice, and realizing they have the power to create beauty in this world." Edward found himself leaning forward, drawn in by Maya's sincerity. He watched as the crowd hung on her every word, many nodding in agreement or wiping away tears. "This center isn't just a building," Maya said, her voice filled with emotion. It's a lifeline for so many in our community. It's a place where people come together, where differences fade away in the face of shared creativity. As Maya's speech came to a close, the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, moved by her words and the passion behind them. Edward clapped too, surprised by the lump in his throat. Maya stepped down from the stage, immediately surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. Edward watched from afar, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about Maya's speech had touched him in a way he hadn't expected. The day after the fundraiser, Maya approached Edward with a hopeful smile. "Edward, I'd like you to come see the art center," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I think it would mean a lot to everyone there." Edward frowned, his mind already on his next business meeting. "Maya, I'm not sure I have the time for—" "Please," Maya interrupted, her eyes pleading. "Just an hour. That's all I'm asking." Sighing, Edward nodded reluctantly. "1 hour," he agreed. The next afternoon, they arrived at the Community Art Center. It was a far cry from the polished galleries Edward was used to. The building was old, its paint peeling in places, but there was a warmth to it that Edward couldn't deny. As they stepped inside, the sound of laughter and excited chatter filled the air. Maya led Edward through the rooms, each one bustling with activity. In one corner, a group of children sat around a table, their small hands covered in colorful paint as they created bright, messy masterpieces. "Look at their faces," Maya whispered, nudging Edward gently. Edward observed the children, noticing the pure joy in their expressions. One little girl held up her painting, beaming with pride. "I made a rainbow," she exclaimed, her gap-toothed smile wide. In another room, they found a group of elderly folks working on a large mural together. Their movements were slow but deliberate, each brushstroke adding to the beautiful scene taking shape on the wall. "Some of these people rarely left their homes before joining our program," Maya explained. "Now they come here every week, finding friendship and purpose." Edward watched as one old man helped his neighbor mix colors, both of them chuckling over some shared joke. The sense of community was palpable, and Edward felt a strange tightness in his chest. As they continued their tour, Edward saw people from all walks of life working side by side. There were teenagers mentoring younger kids, adults rediscovering their creativity, and even a group of veterans finding solace in sculpture. "This is more than just art," Edward murmured, surprise evident in his voice. Maya nodded, her eyes shining. "It's healing, it's connection, it's hope." For the first time, Edward began to understand the passion he'd seen in Maya during her speech. The joy and fulfillment radiating from everyone in the center was undeniable. It wasn't about profit or prestige. It was about something much more fundamental: human connection and self-expression. As they prepared to leave, Edward found himself lingering, watching a young boy carefully add the finishing touches to his painting. The look of concentration on the child's face, followed by a burst of pride as he completed his work, stirred something in Edward he couldn't quite name. As the days passed, Edward found himself thinking more and more about the art center. The joy he'd witnessed there had left an impression on him, one he couldn't easily shake off. Out of a mixture of curiosity and a desire to understand Maya better, he decided to visit the center again. This time, Edward arrived unannounced. He stepped into the bustling main room, feeling slightly out of place in his expensive suit. Maya spotted him and hurried over, her face lighting up with surprise and delight. "Edward, I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her smile warm and genuine. He shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "I thought I'd stop by and see what all the fuss is about." Maya's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Well, since you're here, why don't you join us? We're about to start a pottery class." Before Edward could protest, he found himself seated at a pottery wheel, his jacket discarded and his sleeves rolled up. The clay felt strange and cool beneath his fingers as he tried to shape it into something resembling a bowl. To his surprise, Edward found himself enjoying the process. The concentration required to mold the clay helped quiet the constant buzz of business thoughts in his mind. He listened as the instructor gently guided the class, her words peppered with encouragement and praise. As the weeks went by, Edward's visits to the art center became more frequent. He tried his hand at painting, sculpture, and even joined a community mural project. The center's regulars began to recognize him, greeting him warmly each time he arrived. One afternoon, as Edward helped a group of children with their art projects, he realized something had changed. The sense of purpose he felt here was different from what he experienced in the boardroom. It wasn't about closing deals or increasing profits, it was about connection, creativity, and making a tangible difference in people's lives. He watched as Maya moved around the room, offering words of encouragement and sharing in the excitement of each person's creations. The passion and joy radiating from her were contagious, and Edward found himself smiling more often than not. As he worked alongside the community members, Edward began to see the art center through new eyes. It wasn't just a place for creating art, it was a haven where people from all walks of life could come together, support each other, and find a sense of belonging. As the days grew longer and warmer, Maya and Edward found themselves spending more time together outside of their arranged appearances. One evening, they sat on a bench in a quiet park, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Maya's fingers absently traced the outline of a sketch in her notebook. Edward glanced at her, curiosity getting the better of him. "You're always drawing," he said softly. "How long have you been an artist?" Maya's eyes lit up at the question. "For as long as I can remember," she replied, a wistful smile playing on her lips. "When I was little, my mom would give me crayons and paper to keep me quiet during church. I'd spend the whole service drawing angels and stained glass windows." Edward listened, surprised by his own interest. "And you pursued it?" Maya nodded, her smile fading slightly. "I did. I went to art school, dreaming of gallery shows and making a living from my passion." She paused, her gaze distant. But life had other plans. As Maya shared more about her past, Edward found himself drawn into her story. She spoke of late nights working multiple jobs to pay for art supplies, of the heartbreak of having to choose between buying food or canvases. Despite the hardships, her voice never lost its warmth when she talked about her art. "It must have been tough," Edward said, feeling a twinge of something unfamiliar in his chest. "Was it admiration?" Maya nodded, her eyes meeting his. "It was. There were times I wanted to give up. But every time I picked up a brush or a pencil, I remembered why I couldn't. Art isn't just what I do, Edward. It's who I am." Edward watched her, seeing Maya in a new light. The determination in her eyes, the passion in her voice. It stirred something in him. He'd always valued resilience in business, but this was different. Maya's dedication to her art, despite all the obstacles, was something he couldn't fully grasp, but he found himself respecting it deeply. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for," Edward admitted, his voice soft. Maya smiled, touched by his words. "We all have our strengths, Edward. Sometimes they just look different than we expect." As they sat there, the last rays of sunlight painting the sky in brilliant hues, Edward realized that Maya's resilience and dedication were reshaping his understanding of success and fulfillment. Though he still struggled to fully comprehend the importance of her artistic pursuits, he couldn't deny the admiration growing within him for the woman beside him. As the weeks passed, Edward found himself drawn more and more to the community art center. What had started as a reluctant visit to appease Maya had turned into something unexpected. He began to see the center not just as a place for art, but as a beacon of hope for many in the community. One afternoon, Edward sat in on a children's art class. He watched as young faces lit up with joy, their small hands covered in paint as they created colorful masterpieces. A little girl with pigtails approached him, holding up her painting proudly. "Look, Mr. Edward, I made a rainbow," she exclaimed, her gap-toothed smile melting something inside him. Edward knelt down to her level, his usual stern expression softening. "It's beautiful," he said, surprised by the warmth in his own voice. "You're quite the artist." As he stood up, Edward caught Maya's eye across the room. She was beaming at him, and he felt a strange flutter in his chest. Later that week, Edward called a meeting with his financial advisors. "I want to make a substantial donation to the Community Art Center," he announced, much to their surprise. But Edward didn't stop there. He began showing up at the center regularly, rolling up his sleeves to help with everything from organizing art supplies to painting walls. The feeling he got from these simple acts of kindness was unlike anything he'd experienced in his cutthroat business world. One Saturday, as he helped set up for a community art fair, Edward paused to catch his breath. He looked around at the bustling activity, volunteers hanging artwork, children excitedly preparing their booths, Maya directing it all with infectious enthusiasm. A warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name but found himself cherishing. Maya approached him, her eyes twinkling. "You're really getting into this, aren't you?" she teased gently. Edward chuckled, surprising himself. "I guess I am," he admitted. "I never realized how good it could feel to just help." Maya squeezed his arm, her touch sending a jolt through him. "That's the magic of community, Edward. When we give, we often receive so much more in return." As Edward looked into Maya's eyes, he realized that his world was changing in ways he never could have imagined. The cold, calculating businessman was discovering a part of himself he never knew existed, a part that found joy in giving, in connecting, in making a difference. As the days turned into weeks, Maya and Edward found themselves spending more time together outside of their arranged appearances. What had started as a business deal was slowly evolving into something neither of them had expected. One evening, after a particularly successful fundraising event for the art center, Maya and Edward decided to take a walk through a nearby park. The setting sun painted the sky in warm hues, casting a soft glow on their faces. "You were amazing tonight," Edward said, his voice softer than usual. "The way you spoke about art. It was truly inspiring." Maya felt her cheeks warm at his praise. "Thank you, Edward. I'm just glad people are starting to see how important the center is to our community." As they strolled along the path, their hands brushed against each other. Both felt a spark at the contact, but were too afraid to acknowledge it. Edward found himself opening up to Maya in a way he never had before. "You know, I used to think art was just a waste of time and money, but seeing how it brings people together, how it gives them hope, it's changed something in me." Maya's heart swelled at his words. She looked up at him, seeing a vulnerability in his eyes that she'd never noticed before. "I'm glad you're seeing it differently now. Art has the power to heal, to inspire, to connect us all." They stopped at a small bridge overlooking a pond. The water reflected the colorful sky, creating a mesmerizing scene. Edward turned to Maya, his expression serious but soft. "Maya, I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you've shown me. This arrangement, it's become so much more than I ever thought it could be." Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. She could see the sincerity in Edward's eyes, and it stirred something deep within her. "I feel the same way, Edward. I never expected to." She trailed off, unsure of how to express the emotions swirling inside her. Edward took a step closer, his hand hesitantly reaching for hers. As their fingers intertwined, both felt a surge of warmth and connection. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Neither wanted to break the spell of the moment, afraid to confront the growing feelings between them. Yet, as they walked back hand in hand, both Maya and Edward knew that their relationship had shifted into something far more genuine and precious than they had ever anticipated. As the deadline for the government contract loomed closer, Edward found himself sitting in his office, staring out the window at the bustling city below. His mind, however, wasn't on the contract that had once consumed his every waking moment. Instead, his thoughts drifted to Maya and the art center. He picked up a small clay sculpture from his desk, a gift from one of the children at the center. Its imperfect shape and bright colors brought a smile to his face. Just a few months ago, he would have dismissed such a trinket as worthless. Now it held more value to him than any expensive art piece in his collection. Edward's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant, reminding him of the upcoming meeting with the government officials. He sighed, realizing that his heart wasn't in it anymore. The contract, which had once seemed like the pinnacle of his career, now felt hollow and meaningless compared to the joy he'd experienced at the art center. He thought about Maya's radiant smile when she taught art classes, the laughter of the children as they created their masterpieces, and the sense of community that filled the center. These memories stirred something in Edward that he had never felt before, a sense of purpose beyond making money. As he sat there, Edward realized that his priorities had shifted dramatically. The man who had once viewed everything as a business transaction now found himself valuing things that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. He thought about Maya, her passion, her kindness, and the way she had opened his eyes to a whole new world. Edward stood up and walked to the window, watching as people hurried along the sidewalks below. He realized that he no longer wanted to be the cold, calculating businessman he had been for so long. The impact he was having at the art center, the lives he was touching, and the genuine connection he felt with Maya, these were the things that truly mattered now. Edward's team gathered in the conference room, their faces etched with concern. They had noticed the change in their boss over the past few weeks. The once razor-focused businessman now seemed distracted, his mind often elsewhere during important meetings. Mr. Price, his chief of staff, Sarah, began hesitantly. We've all noticed that you've been different lately. Are you still committed to securing the government contract? Edward looked around the table, seeing the worried faces of his team. He felt a pang of guilt, knowing that their careers and livelihoods depended on his decisions. But at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted inside him. Of course I'm committed, Edward replied, his voice firm but lacking its usual conviction. This contract is important to all of us. The team visibly relaxed, but Edward's internal conflict only intensified. He thought about Maya, her warm smile, and the way she lit up when talking about art. He remembered the children at the center, their faces beaming with pride as they showed off their creations. These memories stirred emotions in him that he had never experienced before. As the meeting continued, Edward found his mind wandering. He nodded at the right moments and made appropriate comments, but his heart wasn't in it. He knew that his relationship with Maya had become more than just a business deal. It had become something real, something that mattered more to him than any contract ever could. After the meeting, Edward retreated to his office. He sat at his desk, staring at the photos of Maya that his PR team had carefully arranged for public consumption. But now, these staged images seemed hollow compared to the genuine moments they had shared at the art center. Edward rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of his internal struggle. He had always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize his emotions, to make decisions based purely on logic and profit. But now, for the first time in his life, his heart and his head were at odds. Maya sat on the plush sofa in Edward's penthouse, her fingers absently tracing the intricate patterns of a throw pillow. She gazed out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Over the past few weeks, Maya had noticed subtle changes in Edward. His once cold demeanor had softened, and he seemed genuinely interested in the art center and her work there. She caught him smiling more often, especially when they were together at community events. But doubt gnawed at her heart. Was this all part of the act? Maya wondered if Edward's newfound warmth was just another calculated move to secure the government contract. After all, their relationship had started as a business arrangement. Maya's heart fluttered when she remembered how Edward had rolled up his sleeves to help paint a mural at the center last weekend. His usually pristine suit was splattered with bright colors, and he had laughed, a real, genuine laugh, when a little girl accidentally smeared paint on his cheek. It can't all be fake, can it? Maya whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. She stood up and walked to the window, pressing her hand against the cool glass. The city below bustled with life, reminding her of the stark contrast between her world and Edward's. Maya felt torn between her growing feelings for Edward and the reality of their situation. What if I'm just fooling myself? She wondered aloud. What if, when this is all over, he goes back to being the cold businessman I first met? Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she considered the possibility. Maya had always prided herself on her strength and independence, but somehow, Edward had managed to slip past her defenses. She cared for him more than she wanted to admit, and the thought of it all being an illusion made her heart ache. Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. She had to remember why she agreed to this arrangement in the first place, to secure her financial future and support the art center. But now, as she stood in Edward's luxurious apartment, she realized that her heart had other plans. The evening of the final event arrived, and Maya found herself standing in front of a full-length mirror, smoothing out the wrinkles in her elegant blue gown. Her heart raced with nervous energy as she thought about the importance of the night ahead. Edward appeared behind her, looking dashing in his tailored tuxedo. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Maya nodded, trying to muster a confident smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." They arrived at the grand ballroom where the government official, Mr. Thompson, greeted them warmly. "Edward, Maya, so good to see you both," he said, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. Throughout the evening, Mr. Thompson seemed to watch their every move. He engaged them in conversation, asking probing questions about their relationship. Maya felt the weight of his scrutiny, knowing that their performance tonight could make or break Edward's chances at securing the contract. "So tell me," Mr. Thompson said, leaning in conspiratorially, "how did you two lovebirds meet?" Maya's heart skipped a beat, but Edward smoothly stepped in. "Actually, it's quite a funny story," he began, wrapping an arm around Maya's waist. As he recounted their fabricated first encounter, Maya marveled at how natural he made it sound. Later, during a slow dance, Maya whispered to Edward, "I think Mr. Thompson is suspicious. He keeps watching us." Edward pulled her closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Then we'll just have to be more convincing," he murmured. As they swayed to the music, Maya found herself getting lost in the moment. Edward's hand on her lower back felt comforting, and she could smell his cologne, a mix of sandalwood and something uniquely him. For a moment, she forgot this was all an act. Mr. Thompson approached them as the song ended. "You two make a lovely couple," he said, his eyes searching their faces. "I must say I'm impressed by how well you complement each other." Maya felt her cheeks flush, unsure if it was from the compliment or the intensity of Edward's gaze as he looked at her. "Thank you," she managed to say. "We do bring out the best in each other." Edward nodded, his arm still around Maya. "She's changed me for the better," he said, and Maya was surprised by the sincerity in his voice. As the night wore on, the pressure to maintain their facade grew. Maya found herself second-guessing every gesture, every word, wondering if they were doing enough to convince Mr. Thompson of their love. As the evening progressed, Edward found himself increasingly distracted. He couldn't take his eyes off Maya, who was effortlessly charming everyone she spoke to. Her genuine warmth and kindness shone through, even in this world of glitz and pretense. Watching her, Edward felt a tightness in his chest. He realized that what had started as a business arrangement had become something much more real. The thought of continuing this charade, of pretending that his feelings for Maya were just an act, suddenly felt unbearable. During a quiet moment, Edward pulled Maya aside. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. Maya looked at him, concern etched on her face. "Is everything okay?" Edward took a deep breath. "No, it's not. I can't do this anymore, Maya. I can't keep pretending." Maya's eyes widened in alarm. "What do you mean? Edward, the contract—" "I don't care about the contract," Edward interrupted, surprising himself with the truth of his words. "I care about you. These past few months, they've changed me. You've changed me." Maya stood silent, her lips parted in shock. Edward continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I thought I could keep this professional, but I can't. My feelings for you are real, Maya. And I can't keep lying to everyone, to you, to myself." He looked around the room, his eyes landing on Mr. Thompson, who was watching them with interest. "I have to tell the truth, even if it costs me everything." Maya reached out, grabbing his arm. "Edward, wait!" But Edward was already moving towards Mr. Thompson, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. He knew what he had to do. It was time to come clean about their arrangement, no matter the consequences. Edward approached Mr. Thompson with determination in his stride. The room fell quiet as people sensed something important was about to happen. Edward cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Mr. Thompson, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart. "I have something I need to confess." Maya stood frozen, her eyes wide with concern and confusion. She watched as Edward took a deep breath before continuing. "When Maya and I first got engaged, it wasn't real," Edward admitted, his words causing a ripple of gasps through the crowd. "It was a business arrangement designed to improve my image and help secure the government contract." The room erupted in hushed whispers and shocked expressions. Mr. Thompson's eyebrows shot up, his face a mix of surprise and disappointment. Edward held up his hand, silencing the murmurs. "But something unexpected happened," he continued, his voice softening as he turned to look at Maya. "I fell in love. Truly, deeply in love." Maya's lips parted in shock, her hand flying to her chest as she struggled to process Edward's words. "Maya showed me a world beyond profits and power," Edward said, his eyes never leaving hers. "She taught me about community, about the joy of helping others, about the beauty of art and creativity. And in doing so, she stole my heart." Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as Edward's words washed over her. The room was dead silent now, everyone hanging on his every word. "I stand before you now not as a businessman trying to secure a deal, but as a man in love," Edward declared, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't care about the contract anymore. I only care about Maya, and I hope she can forgive me for how this all started." Edward turned back to Mr. Thompson, his shoulders squared. "I understand if this disqualifies me from the contract, but I couldn't continue living a lie, not when my feelings for Maya are so real." The room remained silent, the tension palpable. All eyes turned to Maya, who stood rooted to the spot, her expression a mix of shock, confusion, and something else. Something that looked a lot like hope. Maya stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as Edward's words echoed in her ears. The room around her buzzed with whispers and shocked gasps, but she barely heard them. Her mind was reeling, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. She looked at Edward, his eyes filled with a vulnerability she had never seen before. The man who had once seemed so cold and calculating now stood before her, raw and exposed. Maya felt a surge of conflicting emotions wash over her. Slowly, she turned and walked out of the room, needing space to think. She found herself in a quiet hallway, leaning against the wall for support. Her hands trembled as she took deep breaths, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Maya closed her eyes, remembering the past few months. She thought about how Edward had changed, how he had slowly opened up to the world of art and community she held so dear. She recalled the moments when she had seen glimpses of a kinder, more compassionate man beneath his tough exterior. But doubt crept in, whispering in her ear. Could she really trust him? After all, their relationship had started as a lie. How could she be sure his feelings were genuine now? Maya's mind drifted to the art center, to the joy she had seen on Edward's face as he helped the children with their projects. She remembered the way he had listened intently when she spoke about her dreams, the way his eyes had softened when she shared her struggles. Her heart ached with the realization that somewhere along the way, she had fallen for him too. Despite her initial wariness, despite the unusual circumstances of their arrangement, she had come to care deeply for Edward. Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she grappled with her feelings. She wanted to believe Edward, wanted to trust that his love was real, but fear held her back, reminding her of the pain she had experienced in the past. Maya took a shaky breath, wiping away a tear that had escaped. She knew she needed time to sort through her emotions, to decide if she could take the risk of opening her heart fully to Edward. Edward's footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway as he approached Maya. His heart raced, and his palms felt clammy. For the first time in his life, the confident businessman felt truly nervous. Maya looked up as he drew near, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. Edward stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "Maya," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I know this all started as a business arrangement, and I can't blame you if you hate me for that." He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "But somewhere along the way, something changed. You changed me, Maya. You showed me a world I never knew existed, a world full of beauty and compassion." Maya watched him silently, her expression unreadable. Edward continued, his words coming faster now, as if he feared he might lose his courage. "I don't care about the contract anymore. It doesn't matter to me. What matters is you, Maya. Your passion, your kindness, your strength. They've all touched me in ways I never thought possible." He took a tentative step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness or your trust, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are real. You mean more to me than any business deal ever could." Edward's voice softened, filled with a vulnerability that surprised even him. "I've spent my whole life chasing success and power, thinking they would make me happy. But it was all empty, Maya. It's you who's brought meaning into my life. You've shown me what really matters." He paused, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure Maya could hear it. "I love you, Maya, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove it to you, if you'll give me the chance." Maya stood there, her heart racing as she listened to Edward's words. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability in his voice. It was a side of him she'd never seen before, and it touched her deeply. For a long moment she remained silent, processing everything that had happened. The whirlwind of emotions threatened to overwhelm her, but she took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Edward," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. "What you did, it hurt. It made me question everything we've been through." Edward's face fell, but Maya wasn't finished. She took a step closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. "But I've seen you change," she continued. "I've watched you open your heart to the art center, to the community. That wasn't fake. That was real." A glimmer of hope appeared in Edward's eyes. Maya reached out and took his hand, surprising them both with the gesture. "I believe you when you say your feelings are real," she said, "and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have feelings for you too." Edward's breath caught in his throat. He squeezed her hand gently, afraid to break the moment. "But if we're going to do this," Maya continued, her voice growing stronger, "we need to start fresh. No more contracts, no more pretending. Just us as equals, figuring this out together." Edward nodded eagerly. "Yes, absolutely," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's all I want, Maya. A real chance with you." Maya smiled, a small but genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "Then let's start over," she said. "No billionaire, no hired fiancé. Just Edward and Maya, getting to know each other for real this time." Edward felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He returned Maya's smile, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "I'd like that very much," he said softly. As they stood there, hand in hand, both knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, trust to rebuild, and a relationship to nurture. But for the first time, they were facing it together, not as part of a business deal, but as two people ready to explore the possibility of love. As the weeks passed, Edward and Maya found themselves spending more and more time at the community art center. They worked side by side, combining their unique strengths to breathe new life into the once struggling space. Edward's business acumen proved invaluable, as he helped streamline operations and secure funding. Maya's artistic vision and deep connection with the community guided their efforts, ensuring that the center truly served those who needed it most. One sunny morning, they stood together outside the freshly painted building. A bright banner hung above the entrance, announcing the grand reopening. "I can't believe we did it," Maya said, her eyes shining with pride and excitement. Edward squeezed her hand gently. "You did it, Maya. I just helped a little along the way." Maya shook her head, smiling up at him. We did it together. That's what makes it so special. As they cut the ribbon and welcomed the community inside, both felt a sense of accomplishment, unlike anything they'd experienced before. The art center buzzed with energy as people of all ages explored the new facilities and signed up for classes. In the weeks that followed, Maya found herself spending more time in the studio space they'd created. With Edward's encouragement, she picked up her paintbrush again, rediscovering the passion that had been dormant for so long. Edward often watched her work, marveling at the way her face lit up as she created. He realized that supporting her dreams was the greatest gift he could give, far more valuable than any business deal. Their relationship blossomed, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. They learned from each other daily, Edward teaching Maya about financial stability, while Maya showed Edward the importance of creativity and community. As they worked together to make the art center a beacon of hope in the neighborhood, Edward and Maya found that their love had become an integral part of their shared vision for the future. They were no longer just partners in a business arrangement, but true partners in life, united in their desire to make a positive impact on the world around them. Do you believe that a relationship that starts with a lie can ever become truly genuine, like in Edward and Maya's story? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel. I am spending hours upon hours writing these heartwarming stories for you, and your support is what keeps me going.